Today I'm talking with Beck Besecker, the CEO of a company called Marxent, which is building some very interesting solutions for retailers in the augmented reality and virtual reality space. Hi Beck, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, Darius.
Fantastic. Thank you for giving me your time. I wanted to just start out by asking, what is Marxent? What does Marxent do?
So, in a nutshell, you're kind of starting with the problem, if you will, is that visualization in retail has always been important, and whether it's samples or photos or showrooms or videos, retailers know that if they can give a consumer a high quality visualization experience, especially if it's a very high consideration purchase, if you're buying a new living room or spending several $1,000s on a new kitchen or bathroom, that if a consumer can really see the end project, they're more likely it's going to accelerate the sale. The average ticket's going to be higher, and the customer experience is going to be better. And so, AR and VR really, in 3D modeling in general, just the cost of 3D modeling going down, really presents us the first opportunity to do product visualization in a way that consumers have always wanted, and retailers and manufacturers have always imagined, and really make it much more personal, put it in context, be able to mix and match, be able to do it from your own home, or have a composition experience in store. And so what we're trying to do is build a suite of tools that allow retailers and manufacturers to create the visualization experience that consumers have always wanted. And at the same time, all this digital inventory gives you a chance to reduce hard costs like showrooms and samples. You create these opportunities for endless, aisle and endless inventory, and even maybe the potential to reduce, the square foot of a given store.
Okay, great. So, what is the difference between AR and VR? Are these really the same thing, just different names, or are there actually specific differences in the products and the experience?
It's actually quite simple. AR, augmented reality, is simply placing a digital object in context. Placing a sofa in your actual living room, if you will. And you may be checking fit, or does it match? And then AR is a fully immersive experience where the entire environment, is pixels. And so they're really where they cross over, and why a lot of companies are in both AR and VR, is that the underlying tools, which are things like the Unity or Unreal game engines, 3D modeling, databases, communications, they are largely the same for both types of visualization. And we use both depending upon the context. So for instance, if you're at home, you may want to look at that, like I mentioned, that couch in your living room. But if you're in a store, you're not in your room, so you may want to use VR to compose your room, place many objects of furniture, and view it that way. And so they're really two kind of sister technologies depending upon where the consumer is.
Okay, so augmented reality is, let's say I take a picture of a physical product that I actually have, and then I interject that into a virtual space.
It's
Correct?
actually a 3D model
Or a
of
3D model.
the product
Okay.
itself.
Okay.
I'll give you one really interesting. For instance, our very first solution was with a company called AZEK. It's a decking company, like a deck you put in the back of your house.
Mm-hmm.
And the sales reps or the contractors would show up with physical samples, or magazines or flyers, and that's been replaced by an iPad, and they can just stay in your backyard and, kind of like Minecraft, build a deck right on the back of your house virtually. And so you get to not only have they can bring their entire catalog, they can also show the consumer what it's going to look like.
Okay. Now I see that you've been working on a project with Lowe's in
Hmm.
the last few months or probably a year.
3 years.
Okay, great. How is that going, and what are you learning from that?
It's gone well. The Lowe's application is, I would say, is probably the most, it's definitely the first. The first product in all of virtual reality was sold through Lowe's kitchen, which is kind of cool. But it's very much the idea is, traditionally, if you wanted to have a kitchen designed, you might spend 3 or 4 hours with a design consultant, and so you had to be pretty serious about designing a kitchen, right? If you're going to invest that amount of time, and so there was no real way to see a kitchen quickly if you were kind of higher in the funnel and still in your consideration phase. And so the idea of the application, it's an iPad where you drag and drop objects into a scene, put on the headset, and you can be in your kitchen in 15 minutes. And so it's a tool really more aimed at the casual consumer than kind of the designer, if you will.
Okay, so I know that, for example, when I just recently purchased a cabinet from Ikea.
Hmm.
I actually went to their store. They have their own software that actually tries to do things, but I think it's really probably the beginnings of what you're talking about is actually working at Lowe's. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, I think and that's kind of the, beyond Lowe's and other projects. I mean, really kind of where the gap is. If you're just the, average, Joe consumer, and you want to design, a backyard or a living room or a kitchen, um, or you're a salesperson for that company I mentioned, AZEC. Like the design tools that are out there today are really aimed at professionals, and you have to have a license to use them. And so with AR and the ability to use actual 3D models, it becomes much more of a drag and drop experience. So it's just much easier. It's intuitive. It's literally like if you were going to pick up a refrigerator and put it in the kitchen, it feels like you're doing that with a 3D model and you're in the kitchen. So it's very intuitive, right? You don't have to have all this, complex different views and design, where you're drawing and where you have to understand the entire product catalog and so it just becomes the advent of AR VR puts design in kind of a first person view, which makes it much easier for the average person to do design.
yeah, and really, that's really the only thing that will work for the consumers. You can't really expect them to learn how to use your software, and it's just got to be drag and drop.
Yeah, our mental model for Marxent is that, that what we think about is, if you're familiar with the game Minecraft,
Yes.
that it's incredibly easy for people to build these very complex worlds quickly, and we think people are going to want to do that. We kid around. We kind of call what we do Minecraft for moms, uh, and the ability for people to just do it quickly, like you're playing a game of Minecraft. Is coming.
Great. So from this experience and the other experiences with other companies, what do you think is the biggest obstacle or challenge to overcome for this technology to become mainstream? Is it the companies or is it the shoppers?
I actually think it's the content. Funny enough, that if you take away AR and VR, are kind of what you see, right? That's like the end point. But the real problem is, how do you get enough content into the system across many manufacturers and retailers to make it useful? And then when you get that content, I mean, these are like traditionally 3D models have been used like by game studios, right? And you have a model and a geometry and a texture and a finish and lighting, and these are big assets, multiple megabyte type assets. And so the real innovation is, how do you handle that content in such a way that you can make these experiences fast? So we've had to create a bunch of new innovations on how to manage that content, create that content, and distribute that content. But I think that in terms of consumer adoption or retailer adoption, I mean, it's still early, right? I mean, this is going to be a 5 to 10 year kind of effort. And
Right.
it's it's still in the very early stages, but so far we've seen that when consumers have the option to use it, they are overjoyed. And it's it's like stress relief. As soon as you
Right.
can see your finished project and you're about to shell out 50 grand, you just feel a lot more confident about making that purchase.
Exactly. And I mean, I've learned myself from my own experience that consumers in general are a lot more open to new ways of saving them time and making their life easier. Now, I
Hmm.
understand from the business side, it's not just that easy to say, "Oh, this is cool and let's use it." It takes a lot of work and planning and things like that. But so I think this is probably a continuation of a trend of what do they call is the consumerization of the business software even.
Yeah.
So I think this is at least in the right direction for all of us to have easier software to use.
And really what it's
Yeah,
doing too is if you think about products that have been historically kind of internet proof, or they've just not really, these types of purchases, furniture, kitchens, bathrooms, they're not really sold online. People do research, but they actually go in the store. Conversion rates are very low. And or people don't really buy kitchen cabinets online either. And so but with tools like this that require design before purchase and a visualization element, it'll open up new categories to be sold online, which is exciting.
absolutely. I think this is probably how those products will be sold online
Hmm. And I
instead
think
of,
the
yeah.
the other big trend that there's a great piece recently about Macy's and closing stores, and the fact that I can't remember I'm going to guess at the numbers, but in Europe and Japan, the average, I think it's like 1 or 2 square feet of retail space per capita, and in the U.S. it's like 8 or 10 square feet per capita. And so there's this overall trend of, and then if you combine that with the way where people shop is changing, it's moving to sort of these, work, eat, play, shop urban environments where, you're not going to get a 40,000 square foot store. You might get a 2,000 square foot store. Have you ever heard of made.com?
I think I just recently did. It's a company out of Europe.
Yeah, fascinating company. They started online, but they've opened up a couple of physical stores they call brand beacons. It's a furniture store. They're only like 2,000 square feet and they have no furniture in them or very limited. And it's just basically a store of samples and I think that's a good mental model for people who are willing to shop that way without ever, sitting in the couch. And so that's I see U.S. retailers, moving towards, these smaller footprint stores where much of the inventory is virtual.
Yeah, and I mean, how this is going to impact even the concept of a shopping center. It's going to
Well,
be very
yeah,
interesting.
I think too, like um, imagine you sell refrigerators and you go into a DIY store and there's it's like it's like trees, right? It's like a forest of refrigerators. And after looking at 3 stainless steel ones, your ability to differentiate them are, pretty limited. And you can't really do what you want, which is turn them on. They may not have power to them. You can't sort of fill them with products and see what it'll hold. You may not know all the features and benefits, but there's no reason a manufacturer of refrigerators can't put an AR or VR experience in a mall and not actually and make it completely virtual. So I think that it'll be a way that manufacturers sort of pull away from the crowd and can, efficiently market their products without having the physical product present.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the refrigerator, it just like a crazy idea came to my mind is that if I take a picture of my fridge right now and everything that's in it and I put it on a brand new fridge and see, oh, it only fills it halfway through and I have all this extra space. So this is like these are things that we hopefully will be able to do in the future.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So Now, when you talk about, Marxent and the products, are you focusing mostly on in-store experiences right now, or remote as well, like e-commerce, pure e-commerce, as well as
They're
in-store?
both, and they're somewhat related. That we work with a lot of manufacturers to build AR, principally AR applications in the field because they're out, selling, working with the customer, putting it in their context. But that same content, can also be used in a VR experience in the store. So the common denominator is kind of the sharing of content. Or let's imagine you are you manufacture flooring or tiles. Well, consumers want to see that tile in a broader context. And so you need the kitchen cabinet company and you need the lighting company all to be in the same tool so you can show off your flooring. And so there needs to be cooperation between manufacturers to really make this work.
Right. You talked about assets and content. And I think that's one of probably the significant IPs that Marxent is developing from what you mentioned.
Mm.
Now, I saw another company somewhere that I think it was at CES this year, that they use like the Intel camera that's on some of their laptops, or like, is it
Mm-hmm.
called IntelliSense? I'm not sure if the name is correct. And
Mm-hmm.
it actually is supposed to do like a 3D model of a product. Is that similar to what you're doing? And how do companies actually create these the content?
Well, it's actually it's interesting. There's actually a gap. There was a gap in the market that we weren't necessarily aware of when we started, which is whether it's a Oculus Rift or an HTC Vive, that's a kind of PC-based VR, or an iPad that you're using for AR, or a Microsoft HoloLens. They're not going to use like CAD models that you would use in design and construction, and so they're too big, right? They might be like 2 million polygons or triangles. For these applications, those products need to be something like 100,000 or 200,000 polygons. So it's much smaller objects, and so most retailers and manufacturers don't have them. They don't actually have that content, and so that opened up another opportunity to be a part of that content creation. And that industry, in and of itself, is going through massive, you know. Changes in terms of accelerating the ability to create a 3D model. Someday, you'll walk around a chair with your iPad camera, and it'll create a really high quality 3D model instantly. But that doesn't work now. And so there's all these new technologies that call blue light scanning or white light scanning, different types of modeling where they are trying to quickly create models, because a model can be very expensive. I mean, it could range from $50 to several $1,000s depending upon the object. So that's that's why most of what we see, where we see the opportunity happening, is in these higher end purchases. Like if you're Zappos, for instance, it'd be awesome if you could visualize a shoe in your hand before you bought it. But, they create a 3D model of every shoe, and they go through, I don't know what their turnover is, but let's say it's like 2,000 shoes, every month or every quarter. It would just be too expensive and to create 3D models. And so over time, as the cost of 3D modeling comes down, the technology improves, you'll see all sorts of categories. But right now, there needs to be a lot of innovation in 3D model creation to make that happen.
Okay. Now, what is a typical customer size for Marxent? Which companies are you really working with right now?
It would be mostly, large, home builders. It would be major manufacturers. Think kind of like a American Woodmark that does kitchen cabinets, or a Kohler that does bathroom fixtures and finishes. So it's relatively large, several hundred million to multi-billion dollar companies are typical clients.
Okay. And what is a typical implementation? Do you actually go through and scan and create models for every one of their products?
We
Or
do. Mm-hmm.
wow.
In some cases, they have some assets that we can work with. In some cases, we're working, with the product itself.
Okay, so let's say, for example, in the Lowe's example, you actually went through, because Lowe's is not selling their own cabinets typically, right? They're selling other manufacturers' cabinets. So
Yes, exactly.
so you actually go through and model every one of the manufacturers, and then have to build those in. I mean, that's a pretty complex process in and of itself, is matching the manufacturer with the retailer as well. And then
I
what about
imagine that over
pricing?
time, that one of the things that's really important as we go in and talk to these companies is you have to tell a broader story about the use of 3D content. AR and VR are one application, but there are other applications of 3D content like photo replacement, which is a big industry in and of itself. Where I don't have to take photos, I can just use a 3D model, and which reduces cost by orders of magnitude and provides for reuse. There is can be used in the manufacturing design process. It could be used in the pre-sale process. Could be used for e-commerce content. And so we try to say, hey, listen, if you're going to put your catalog and make it virtual, AR and VR might be the kind of the sexy application that you start with, but you'll find many uses of that content over time.
Yeah, and what I meant by that was actually the potential in it, and the kind of like this value that I think Marxent is adding for the retailers is to take care of all of that for them, so they don't
Hmm.
have to invest in it themselves and modeling and things like that. I mean, video is really the next, I guess, holy grail in any kind of marketing. So just imagine like taking a 3D model that's like rotating of a product and using that in your marketing.
Nope. Yeah,
Uh,
yep, that industry is growing quickly too. Yep.
right, right. So, what's next for Markson in the next 12 months or so, that you can tell us?
It's largely to, I mean, we're seeing good ROI for our customers that have been engaged with us for a year or so, and so now it's fine tuning the user experience. It's making it faster to do a project. Um, when we first started, a project may have taken 9 months. Now a project can take as little as 12 weeks. And so it's really about, taking the instances that we've created and just making the whole process more efficient. Everything back to our conversation, from content creation to, creating the experience, and, getting a lot of reuse out of working with a lot of customers. You get more and more reuse out of the platform. You just, directionally get quicker over time. So that's where our focus is how do you make it fast, efficient, and more easy to replicate.
Okay, and one more question regarding working with AR headset manufacturers. How's that experience been, like with the Oculus and companies like that? Has that been a pretty good experience?
It is. I mean, they're platform building as well, trying to provide us with tools and APIs and integration systems that just make it easier for solution providers like us to work with them. But they're very active in the space, looking for companies like us and more companies like us to fill the market so they can. And a lot of them are starting to look outside of gaming. I mean, gaming is obviously kind of the most obvious big space. I think it's a $50 billion market or something like that. But the more and more, especially as they've seen applications in the market like ours, they're starting to reach out and say, hey, we see opportunities beyond gaming. What do you need our equipment to do to be able to help you?
Great. Yeah, I think we are all, as software vendors, we're all dependent on the whole ecosystem of other products being developed at the same time. So it's
Yeah,
great
I
to see
learned that
that.
with my first company that, my favorite quote is there's no difference between being early and wrong. And that's a function of not usually, it's usually a good idea and there's usually demand. It's beyond your product. It's to really make things work. Um, Employee training, signage, promotion, case studies, integrations into e-commerce systems. I mean, it's all the things surrounding it that don't happen overnight that you're really dependent upon. And so my expectation is that we're kind of in this really heady, kind of hyped up period right now. There'll be sort of that Gartner trough of disillusionment here over the next couple of years as things don't happen as fast as you think they are. And then it'll sort of, like e-commerce did, kind of, slowly catch on. And by the time it's really here, it'll seem, obvious. But it's going to be a 10-year investment by a lot of different companies to really make this scale.
Right. I agree. We're looking at pretty much the same kind of a timeline, and it sounds like we could definitely share some war stories from our past experience. I mean, that what you mentioned is like being early is almost the same as being wrong. I've lived that myself too. So,
yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Now you're going to be speaking at the Shop.org conference later this month.
Yes. Yes. I think that's Chicago, right? Or maybe
Dallas. I
Dallas,
think it's Dallas, right. Thank you so much, Beck. I really appreciate your time and look forward to hearing awesome new developments from Marxent.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Darius.